29th November 1945, North Atlantic, approximately 200 kilometers northwest of Ireland. HMS Onslow, a destroyer, tows U-2475 toward deep water. The submarine is intact, operational, surrendered. Her crew has been removed. Her hatches are open. Her ballast tanks are partially flooded. She is being taken to her execution. At 1400 hours, Onslow releases the tow. U-2475 drifts. Onslow withdraws to safe distance. At 1430 hours, British demolition charges detonate inside the submarine. The explosions rupture her pressure hull. Water floods the compartments. U-2475 settles stern first. Within 3 minutes, she disappears beneath the surface. Depth is approximately 3,000 meters. She will never be recovered. This is the 97th U-boat sunk during Operation Deadlight. 19 more remain to be destroyed. By 30th January 1946, all 116 surrendered U-boats will be on the ocean floor, the largest mass scuttling in naval history, the systematic destruction of Germany's submarine fleet, the burial of technology too dangerous to preserve. The submarines are not war prizes. They are threats, even defeated, surrendered, and disarmed. They represent capability the Allies do not want to exist. The submarines use technology developed over 6 years of war. Snorkel systems for submerged operations, advanced torpedoes, high-speed underwater designs, acoustic homing weapons, technology that should not spread. Therefore, the submarines will be destroyed, not studied and preserved, not divided among Allied nations, not kept as memorials, destroyed, sunk in deep water where salvage is impossible. The technology will die with the submarines. The U-boat will become history, not template for future weapons. This is Operation Deadlight, the mass execution of the U-boat fleet, the systematic destruction of 116 submarines, the largest naval scuttling operation in history, the end of the U-boat war delivered not by combat but by demolition charges in empty hulls. To understand Operation Deadlight, you need to understand both what the Allies captured in May 1945 and why they chose to destroy it rather than preserve it. Germany surrendered on 8 May 1945. The surrender was unconditional. All German military forces ceased operations. This included the U-boat fleet, which had been Germany's most effective naval weapon throughout the war. Approximately 360 U-boats remained operational on 8 May. They were ordered to surface, identify themselves, and surrender to Allied forces. The submarines complied. Over several weeks, U-boats surfaced around the Atlantic and sailed to designated ports. Most surrendered in Germany at Kiel, Wilhelmshaven, and other bases. Some surrendered at sea to Allied warships. A few reached Norway and surrendered there. By early June, approximately 156 U-boats were in Allied custody. The submarines represented enormous technological achievement. The Type 21 U-boat, introduced in 1944, was revolutionary. It could make 17 knots submerged, faster than most Allied escort vessels. It could remain submerged for extended periods using snorkel. It carried advanced torpedoes with acoustic homing. Had it been deployed in numbers earlier, it might have changed the Battle of the Atlantic outcome. The Type 23 coastal submarine was also advanced, small, quiet, capable of operating in shallow waters where larger submarines could not, difficult to detect, lethal against merchant shipping. These technologies represented years of development and combat refinement. They were valuable to any navy that obtained them. The Allies faced a decision. What to do with the captured submarines? Several options existed. First, keep them, distribute among Allied navies, study the technology, incorporate advances into future designs. Second, destroy them immediately, prevent technology from spreading, ensure Germany never rebuilds submarine capability. Third, divide them, some kept for study, others destroyed. The decision-making process involved political and military considerations. The Soviet Union wanted submarines. They had suffered enormously during the war and wanted German technology for their fleet. Britain wanted some submarines for study but was wary of technology spreading. The United States had captured several high-value U-boats during the war and wanted to prevent others from obtaining similar capability. France wanted submarines to rebuild their fleet. The Tripartite Naval Commission, composed of British, American, and Soviet representatives, negotiated the division. The final agreement allocated 10 submarines to each of Britain, the United States, and Soviet Union. France received some smaller boats, The remaining approximately 116 submarines would be destroyed. The destruction would be systematic, public, and irreversible. Operation Deadlight was the code name for the destruction program. The location was selected carefully. Deep water northwest of Ireland. Beyond the continental shelf, depth exceeded 2,000 meters. Any submarine sunk there would be unrecoverable with 1945 technology. The location was also convenient. British bases in Northern Ireland could provide support. The route from German ports to the scuttling area was direct. The operation began in November 1945. The submarines were moved from German ports to Loch Ryan and Lisahally in Northern Ireland. There they were prepared for towing. Crews were removed. Hatches were opened. Demolition charges were placed. Ballast tanks were partially flooded to ensure rapid sinking when charges detonated. Each submarine was towed individually to the scuttling area. The towing was conducted by British and Canadian destroyers and frigates. The route took approximately 24 to 36 hours, depending on weather. Once in the designated area, the tow was released. The submarine drifted. Demolition charges were detonated remotely or by timer. The submarine sank. The escorts waited until the submarine disappeared, then returned for the next. The process was methodical. One submarine destroyed. Return to Northern Ireland. Collect the next submarine. Tow to scuttling area. Destroy. Repeat. From late November 1945 through January 1946, British and Canadian vessels destroyed 116 U-boats. The rate was approximately 1 to 2 submarines per day. The operation continued regardless of weather. Storms complicated towing but did not stop the process. Some submarines sank during towing. The North Atlantic in winter is brutal. Storms with waves exceeding 15 meters are common. The U-boats being towed were partially flooded, had open hatches, were barely seaworthy. Several broke free from tows during storms and sank before reaching the scuttling area. Others flooded through open hatches and sank prematurely. These losses were acceptable. The submarines were being destroyed anyway. Sinking during tow achieved the same result. Not all submarines reached the scuttling area. Several broke up in storms and sank in shallower water. At least 12 submarines are documented as sinking en route, in depths of 500 to 1,500 meters. These wrecks are theoretically salvageable, but have never been recovered. They remain where they sank, rusting on the ocean floor closer to Britain than intended. The submarines that reached the scuttling area and were deliberately destroyed followed consistent pattern. Tow released at designated coordinates. Charges detonated. Submarine sinks within minutes. Depth typically 2,500 to 3,000 meters. Recovery impossible with existing technology. The submarines were gone permanently. The operation was observed by international press. Journalists accompanied some towing missions. Photographs were taken. Films were made. The Allies wanted the destruction documented. The message was clear. Germany's submarine capability was being eliminated. The U-boat threat was ended. The technology was being buried at sea where it could not be recovered or replicated. The crews who had operated the submarines were not present. They had been removed when the boats surrendered. Most were in prisoner of war camps. Some had been repatriated to Germany. They learned of their submarine's destruction through news reports. The reactions varied. Some were indifferent. The war was over. The submarines were irrelevant. Others were angry. The submarines represented their service, their sacrifice, their comrades who died. Destroying the boats felt like desecration. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Schrödele, who surrendered U-251 in May 1945, later described learning his submarine had been destroyed. He felt conflicted. Intellectually, he understood why the Allies destroyed the boats. Politically, preservation was impossible. But emotionally, he felt loss. The submarine had been his command, his home, his weapon. Its destruction felt personal despite the necessity. The technical analysis of the captured submarines continued even as Operation Deadlight proceeded. The 30 submarines allocated to Allied navies were studied intensively. British and American engineers examined every system. The Type 21 boats particularly received attention. Their high submerged speed, battery capacity, and acoustic quieting were revolutionary. These features influenced post-war submarine design significantly, but studying 30 submarines was sufficient. The remaining 116 provided no additional information. Destroying them prevented technology transfer to nations the Allies did not trust. The Soviet Union received their 10 allocated submarines, but 116 more were kept from them and everyone else. The technology was controlled through destruction. The environmental impact was not considered. In 1945, disposing of military equipment at sea was standard practice. Thousands of tons of munitions, weapons, and equipment were dumped in oceans worldwide. The U-boats were just another category of military waste. The fact that each submarine contained fuel, oil, batteries, and potentially unexploded ordnance was noted but not considered problematic. The ocean was vast. The depth was great. The material would disperse and decay naturally. Modern environmental assessment would condemn this practice. The submarines are leaking oil, heavy metals, and other pollutants. Battery acid is corroding through hulls. Torpedoes are degrading. But in 1945, these concerns were not raised. The priority was destroying the submarines quickly and completely. Environmental impact was irrelevant. The operation was completed by 30th January 1946. 116 U-boats were destroyed. The submarines ranged from small Type 23 coastal boats to large Type 21 fleet submarines. All went to the bottom. The scuttling area, roughly 200 kilometers northwest of Ireland, became a mass grave for German submarines. The final count documented 116 submarines destroyed during Operation Deadlight. An additional 12 sank during towing. The 30 allocated to Allied navies were preserved. Approximately 20 U-boats were in too poor condition to tow and were scuttled in German harbors. The total surrendered fleet of approximately 156 submarines was accounted for by destruction, allocation, or harbor scuttling. The strategic impact was permanent. Germany's submarine capability was eliminated. The technology was dispersed or destroyed. Future German naval power would not include submarines. This restriction was formalized in occupation agreements. Germany was prohibited from building or operating submarines. The ban lasted until West Germany joined NATO in 1955 and was permitted to rebuild limited submarine force under alliance control. The psychological impact on former U-boat crews was significant. Approximately 30,000 U-boat personnel survived the war. 28,000 died in combat. The survivors watched their navy destroyed. The submarines they served on were sunk without ceremony. Their wartime service was dismissed as criminal. Many U-boat veterans felt dishonored by how the submarines were treated. This feeling was compounded by immediate post-war atmosphere. U-boats were associated with unrestricted submarine warfare, which had killed thousands of merchant sailors. The public viewed U-boat crews as war criminals. The fact that they followed orders and fought according to naval warfare laws was ignored. The moral judgment was harsh. The submarine's destruction reinforced the condemnation. But time changed perspectives. By the 1960s and 70s, historians began re-examining U-boat operations. The conclusion was that U-boat crews fought as professionally as circumstances allowed. Atrocities occurred but were exceptions. Most U-boat crews followed international laws of naval warfare. They attacked legitimate targets. They attempted to rescue survivors when possible. They were warriors, not criminals. This rehabilitation of U-boat crews' reputation made the destruction of the submarines seem less justified in retrospect. The boats were technology, not war crimes. Destroying them eliminated valuable historical artifacts. Preserving a few for museums would have been appropriate. But in 1945, preservation was politically impossible. The submarines had to be destroyed to demonstrate Allied control and prevent technology transfer. Modern wreck diving has located some Operation Deadlight submarines. The wrecks in shallower water, those that sank during towing, are accessible to technical divers. Photographs show submarines sitting upright on the ocean floor, hatches open, slowly corroding. The wrecks are protected as war graves. Diving is permitted but salvage is prohibited. The submarines remain where they sank. The deeper wrecks, in 2,500 to 3,000 meters depth, have never been visited. The depth exceeds safe diving limits. Only specialized submersibles can reach them. No expeditions have been mounted. The submarines remain unseen, unknown except through records of their scuttling. They are the majority of Operation Deadlight losses. They will likely remain undisturbed permanently. The historical assessment of Operation Deadlight is mixed. Militarily, the operation was necessary. The submarines represented advanced technology that needed to be controlled. Destruction prevented proliferation. The operation was executed efficiently. The submarines were eliminated as planned. From military perspective, Operation Deadlight succeeded completely. Historically, the operation was tragic. 116 submarines representing advanced technology and thousands of man-hours of construction, were destroyed. These submarines could have been preserved in museums. They could have been studied more extensively. Instead, they were dumped in the ocean. Future generations lost access to important artifacts. Environmentally, the operation was irresponsible. The submarines are polluting the ocean floor. Oil and heavy metals are leaking. Battery acid is corroding through hulls. The pollution will continue for decades or centuries. Cleanup is impossible at those depths. The damage is permanent. But 1945 decision-makers did not consider this. Environmental consequences were not part of the calculation. For the sailors who operated the submarines, Operation Deadlight was burial of their service. The submarines they risked their lives in were destroyed without honor. Their contribution to naval warfare was dismissed. Their sacrifice was unrecognized. The destruction of the submarines felt like destruction of their identity. Many never reconciled this loss. The operation remains the largest mass scuttling in naval history. 116 submarines deliberately destroyed. Approximately 80,000 tons of submarines sunk in 3 months. The scale was unprecedented. No similar operation occurred before or since. Operation Deadlight was unique in scope and finality. The submarines lie on the ocean floor northwest of Ireland. Most are at depths exceeding 2,500 meters. They are slowly corroding. The steel is rusting. The pressure hulls are collapsing. Within centuries, they will be unrecognizable. The ocean is reclaiming them. Eventually, nothing will remain but scattered debris on the seafloor. This is Operation Deadlight, the mass execution of the U-boat fleet, the systematic destruction of German submarine capability, the burial of advanced technology in deep water, the end of the U-boat delivered not through combat, but through demolition charges in empty hulls. 116 submarines destroyed. 30,000 tons of steel sent to the bottom. Technology too dangerous to preserve, too advanced to leave intact. Eliminated through systematic scuttling. The pride of the Kriegsmarine reduced to wrecks on the ocean floor. The submarines represented years of development. They incorporated lessons from 6 years of combat. They killed thousands of Allied sailors. They nearly won the Battle of the Atlantic. They were the most effective German naval weapon of the war, and they were destroyed methodically, publicly, permanently, to ensure they never threatened anyone again. This was not war. This was aftermath. The defeated submarines towed to their graves. The technology buried where it could not be recovered. The capability eliminated where it could not be replicated. The message delivered clearly. The U-boat was finished. 116 submarines. 3 months of systematic destruction. The largest mass scuttling in history. The definitive end of the U-boat war. The burial of the submarines that nearly defeated the Allies. Operation Deadlight. The mass grave of the U-boats. The systematic destruction of Germany's submarine fleet. The elimination of technology through drowning. The submarines are gone. The wrecks remain. The ocean keeps them. The technology died with them. The threat was eliminated. The era ended. That is Operation Deadlight. That is the fate of the surrendered U-boats. That is how the Battle of the Atlantic truly ended. Not with combat. With demolition charges in empty hulls. With submarines towed to deep water and sunk. With technology buried where it could never be recovered. 116 U-boats, all destroyed, all on the ocean floor northwest of Ireland, all slowly corroding, all becoming unrecognizable, all returning to the ocean that was their battlefield and became their grave. Operation Deadlight, the end of the U-boat delivered through systematic scuttling, the final chapter written not in combat but in destruction. The submarines that survived the war destroyed by the peace, that is their fate. That is their end. That is Operation Deadlight, the mass grave of the U-boats, the systematic burial of German submarine capability, the elimination of advanced technology through drowning in deep water. 116 submarines, all destroyed, all gone, all buried in the North Atlantic, all slowly dissolving into the ocean floor. That is Operation Deadlight. That is the end of the U-boat. That is enough.